With Israel breaking the ceasefire in Gaza, Yemen's Houthi movement has resumed its blockade of Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, and this has infuriated Donald Trump, who's launched a wave of airstrikes in Yemen over the last week, killing women and children. But what's not been reported is that Keir Starmer has secretly embroiled Britain in those airstrikes on Yemen. And I'm joined now by Iona Craig, the reporter who broke this story for Declassified.
Thanks for having me, Phil. Before going on to Britain's role in these strikes, there's of course this story that has taken over the world over the last few days. The story in the Atlantic of this now infamous Signal group chat, which the Atlantic's editor was somehow CC'd into or part of. As much as there has been an uproar about how that happened and the security issues over that, a lot of what's missing in that coverage is the outcome of that chat. The subject of that chat is the first strikes in Yemen by the US under the Trump administration. And the very first one of those strikes on that night, on the 15th of March, which is detailed in that reporting in the Atlantic from the Signal group chat. And that strike killed at least 13 civilians. The Yemen Data Project, which I work with, we released a report on the first week of strikes, and that showed that at least 25 civilians were killed in that first week. And I think this really sickening part of it was sort of seeing Michael Waltz, the national advisor to Trump, using sort of emojis in his response to how well the strikes had gone, a fist bump and a fire emoji along with an American flag. Michael Waltz has claimed that that first strike hit their top missile guy. They're obviously referring to the Houthis, I assume, and that top missile guy had just walked into his girlfriend's house. So they clearly knew that they were hitting a civilian building and a civilian home.
You've got this exclusive for us about Britain's involvement with this wave of airstrikes. Can you tell us about what you found and how you found out about it?
It was because I focused so much on Yemen that I was watching these strikes happening. They started on Saturday, the 15th of March in Yemen. And on Sunday, I was watching the kind of flight radar and tracking that is publicly available for anybody to look at, and noticed this RAF aircraft that had come from Cyprus and was, when I was watching it, in the Red Sea, in the northern Red Sea. And that was in the rough location of where the US strike carrier group is now stationed, which is the USS Harry S. Truman strike carrier group, which the Americans have been using for this campaign of bombing in Yemen. And I looked at it and thought, why would that RAF aircraft be there? It's an air tanker, so it's designed for air-to-air refueling. And it was in the Red Sea for some hours over the evening on Sunday, the 16th of March, and returned back. And then looking at the track record of it, it had been there on the Saturday, on the 15th, when the airstrike started as well. And that was really then confirmed to me by a defence source who said, yes, the RAF was not involved in airstrikes, but they were involved in supporting the defence of the USS Harry S. Truman with air-to-air refueling. And this is really kind of crucial to those strikes.
Why are the US and UK carrying out these strikes and not Israel? Because it seems like this is being done largely for Israel's benefit rather than the interests of the British public here.
Well, yeah, there's two things I'd say on that. Is firstly, yeah, when Trump first started these strikes on the 15th of March, the message that went out was this was to stop Houthi attacks on international shipping. There hadn't actually been any strikes by the Houthis on commercial vessels since the 18th of November last year. So they had, well, certainly paused, even if they hadn't stopped. The only recent attacks have been against US aircraft carriers in the Red Sea, which hadn't happened since the Gaza ceasefire. So the ceasefire in Gaza had led to a kind of de facto ceasefire in Yemen, if you like. And so The only thing that had changed in the week or the days before these airstrikes started was that the Houthis had given an ultimatum to Israel to say, we will renew our blockade on the Red Sea. We will prevent Israeli or Israeli linked ships going through the Red Sea if you don't lift the blockade on Gaza. And as we know, Israel had been preventing humanitarian aid, food, water, even humanitarians themselves from going into Gaza. The Houthis gave Israel an ultimatum, gave them a deadline. When that deadline expired after 4 days, obviously Israel hadn't lifted that blockade on Gaza or the siege of Gaza. And so the Houthis said they were going to relaunch attacks on Israeli linked vessels in the Red Sea. Now, no strikes against those vessels had happened, but this appears to be a preemptive move by the Trump administration in defense of Israeli shipping, if you like, by carrying out these strikes before the Houthis had actually done anything.
And the defence source has indicated to you that the jets that the RAF were refueling were not the ones doing the airstrikes, but the ones that were kind of flying around above the aircraft carrier to defend it in case the Houthis sent in drones or missiles during the kind of 5-6 hour onslaught. But do you think that distinction will really make much difference to the families of those who've died in Yemen during those airstrikes? I mean, there's horrific footage that's been published by the Houthis. I'm not sure how much of it we can actually show because it is so graphic, of very young children with horrendous burns. Do you think their families will really see much of a distinction here in the way the RAF has tried to say, well, we're sort of involved in the defence side of the operation, but not the offensive side of it?
No, I'm sure not in the same way as it the type of missiles or whether it be in the past when it was the America carrying out strikes in Yemen, it was often drone strikes to a person on the ground. It makes little difference whether it's a drone or a fighter jet carrying out those strikes. But yeah, and it comes down to the same thing in the sense that Britain is enabling that bombing campaign. It is enabling those strikes, whether that is filling up the fuel tanks of a fighter jet that's carrying out strikes or a fighter jet that's flying loops around the strike carrier group. It is enabling America to carry out the bombing campaign, whichever way you look at it, in the sense of Britain helping and supporting the US and what it's doing. It needs the UK support in order to be able to carry out as many strikes as it can in that night. It obviously doesn't hold enough fuel to be able to do that alone. Otherwise, why would it be asking the RAF to do that? And so we are enabling this bombing campaign. Some of the targets we've seen being hit. I mean, UN agencies have actually confirmed that at least 2 children were killed in those strikes. One was aged 6 and the other one was 8, 2 boys. Airstrikes have hit a school in Sada. There have been power stations hit, part of a hospital, a kind of medical dispensary, if you like, of a medical clinic that was hit, and residential areas in Al Jarraf in the northern part of Sana'a, where there was multiple civilian casualties in the first 2 nights of the strikes as well. We've seen, civilian targets being hit as well as military. You're looking at casualties of that's dead and injured of more than 165 now over the last 9 days or 9-10 nights.
And this is yet another example of Britain using its base on Cyprus, the 3% of the island that it never gave back at so-called independence in 1960, to project military power all over the world, often to the detriment of civilians in the global south. So the air tanker that you saw, it flew from Cyprus. This is the same base where the spy flights going over Gaza have been taking off from throughout the genocide there. So I know there's mounting pressure on in Cyprus now against that base, and this will be another issue I expect that will feed into that. But what's the reaction been like in Yemen to your revelation about British involvement? You've spoken to both someone in the Houthi Politburo, but also someone who is completely on the other side of the political divide in Yemen.
Mohammed al-Bahati, whose comment is in the piece, saw it very much as a little bit, as I've mentioned, actually, is Britain enabling the US to carry out these strikes. I mean, he put it more strongly in the sense that he said that the Houthis were pushing back against the USS Harry S. Truman and attacking in the strike carrier group, and essentially that Britain, by defending the strike carrier group, was defending the US. And that this was morally indefensible, that also because of this, he very much connected it to the war in Gaza as well, which is one of the reasons why the Houthis are doing all of this in the first place, began their attacks against shipping in the Red Sea and Israeli linked vessels, and said that Britain is effectively, is supporting that the genocide in Gaza. From southern Yemen, the person that I spoke to, I think, he spoke to me a bit more at length than what I was able to put in the piece, really, in the end. And he comes from an area that has come under attack and has had to defend itself from the Houthis, who put the southern city of Aden under siege back in 2015, when I was there, actually. And so would never in any shape or form have previously described himself as being pro-Houthi in any way. In fact, obviously quite the opposite. But he said that, certainly from what he sees, a lot of this is about sovereignty, and the Houthis are protecting the sovereignty of Yemen in the way that the internationally recognized government of Yemen hasn't, in addition to the support for Gaza and the Palestinians and standing up to Israel, which is an incredibly important role that is seen not just by Yemenis, but in the wider region by the populations, even if it's not by their rulers or their governments. And so, yeah, he was very much in support of what the Houthis are doing, in the sense of whether it be targeting the US in return, these tit-for-tat attacks, or targeting Israel, or protecting the sovereignty of Yemen as he saw it.
Thank you, Iona. It does feel like we're living through an incredibly dangerous time in the world. So if you really want to know what Britain is doing in these conflicts, how it's secretly helping Trump and Israel to inflame the situation in the Middle East, it's essential that you follow Iona's work, which we've published on Declassified UK. And thank you to all our subscribers who follow this channel. We've just passed over 100,000, which is a big milestone for us. The channel has grown hugely in the last 15 months. So thank you for everyone who's been following and supporting the channel.